Many of you in the audience know, or at least have heard that CERIAS is a lead technical university for the SIMANI effort, which is a Department of Energy initiative to establish cybersecurity for energy efficient advanced manufacturing. So we've completed the first year of research, and there was an annual meeting down in San Antonio 3 weeks ago yesterday. Actually, it was 2 days, 3 weeks ago today as well. And I'm sitting in the audience at that annual meeting, and Tommy Gardner was on the agenda to speak, and I enjoyed the talk so much. And he started talking on software security and the supply chain and software bill of materials, and I went, wow, we're talking about that in 3 weeks up at the symposium. And so after Dr. Gardner's talk, I went up to him and said, I know this is very short notice, and I'm not even sure I can squeeze it into the agenda, but you're on target with what we're trying to talk about. And obviously your talk at the SIMANI conference aligns with our SIMANI work here. So I darn near twisted his arm to at least take a look at his calendar. And he said, if I can work it in, I'll do it. So we came back, we shuffled the schedule around, he shuffled his schedule around, and it's our honor to be able to have him today. So Tommy is currently serving as the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer at HP Federal. But previously to HP, he held similar roles with Jacobs Engineering, Cytor, and Mantech. But I love going even further back into his history, where he served as a senior technical executive at Raytheon, and then also served as the Deputy of Science and Technology for the Chief Naval Research Officer. Tommy was part of the program yesterday in the fireside chat. Again, was not surprised, but was amazed at his insight into cybersecurity from a different perspective. So it's my great honor to be able to introduce Dr. Tommy Gardner as our next speaker. Tommy.
Thanks. That was way too long introduction. We could have been halfway through the speech by now. No, I really enjoy coming here. I love technical conferences. I learn something at every one. And anybody that tells you they're a cyber expert, they don't know what cyber is. There are no cyber experts. There are people that have deep in-depth knowledge in certain areas of cyber. A few people that do that have an inch or two deep in other areas of cyber, but there's no total who knows it all. That's just, there's too much to know and there's too much to research. And I love an organization like this because it allows you to go in depth in areas. It allows you to stay up to speed, to stay up to date. And that's probably the hardest thing I have in this field, is trying to stay up to date in the cybersecurity world. I asked the head of Carnegie Mellon's SEI, who's an old friend from the Air Force, and how do you stay up to date at Carnegie Mellon, which is another institute that has great cyber instincts, great software capabilities, and they better watch out for Purdue, or they're going to fall down the list of the U.S. World Report listing if they're not careful. You guys are doing great here. And the answer was, you know, it takes everybody, and it takes a community sharing with each other. So you don't have to study it all in all areas. You need to know your area well, and then be able to share and be willing to share. And that was great advice. Paul Nielsen is an individual at Carnegie Mellon who, and he's gone out and hired some really good people. And that's the key. You can't do it alone. You've got to have support. You have to find the talent and use the talent. And I think you've done that here. And so 25 years, that's going to be a great celebration next year. And I think 25 more after that, then you have your feet on the ground. Be ready to be experts in cyber. So we'll see. It'll change, and it changes every year. That's the hard part. Brandon's boss at CIS, I've met her. I've gotten to know her. Jen Easterling, very impressive lady, West Point graduate. And so you know, anytime a West Point graduate does go good, I'm impressed. But she's really been a leader. And the nice thing about the federal government here is Jen Easterling and Chris Inglis, who came out of NSA and now the cybers are in the White House. They know each other. They've worked with each other for years. When Jen was up at NSA working for Chris, and it's nice to see Chris, who's an Air Force Academy graduate, is doing really well, trying to build up an organization, trying to coordinate throughout government what needs to be coordinated in this field. And I've gotten to know Chris a bit, both when he was in NSA and now in his new position. And he loves to talk to me, not because I know anything about cyber. It's because I was a submariner, and his son went to the Naval Academy and is now a submarine officer. And so I'm wanting to talk about some nuance of cyber that I'm wrestling with. He wants to talk about the submarine force because he wants to know what his son's getting involved in, what his son's involved in. I just love that about Chris. He's really into his family, and you know, you have to applaud that as you go. Now, I have never seen a CISA presentation, and I've seen quite a few of them, where they didn't tell you they need help and they have open recs ready to offer jobs. And so, you know, you think by now they would have had all their jobs filled, but no, they're still looking for talent. And I think your comeback saying, hey, we're here to help was a perfect comeback because there are other resources. Government, you don't have to have everybody in government working in a government position. You've got industry and academia ready to support government at the drop of a hat. And it gets back to all it takes is a little money. You know, that's what makes it happen. You got to have some funding, and the government has some funding. If the Congress ever gets a budget approved this year, which I think, you know, it's on the way. We'll get one day. There's an election this year. They're going to approve something before they people go to the polls. So I'm kind of optimistic on that. Well, hopefully do. When I was at Symantec, which really, as a mechanical engineer, I love advanced manufacturing issues. I love the work they're doing in this new DOE lab created at the University of Texas, San Antonio, that's looking at the ability to secure our industrial organizations, particularly manufacturing. And 3D print or advanced manufacturing, you know, one of the goals and objectives is bring the jobs back home. Now, it's going to be different jobs than the manufacturing we did 30, 40, 50 years ago, but it's important jobs, more higher pay for the jobs, maybe fewer jobs, but the transaction costs from logistics and the transportation is a savings that will cover any capital investment that you have to make, at least theoretically. There's potential when you can drive the economic order quantity from thousands to tens of thousands down to an economic order quantity of one. There's savings. There's potential for a cost avoidance or actually true cost savings in manufacturing. And it benefits the higher educated American worker from having jobs that are more oriented in the high-tech field of controlling numerical machines, or even a lights out factory. It's very, very possible with the technology we have. The only holdup is the economics. So I'm really hopeful that Symantec continues in the success they've had in their first year, and appreciate the work that Purdue and CERIAS is providing to support them. When I talked at that lecture, the first slide I have, and I usually don't use slides, but they're insistent that I have a slide. The first slide, it may have been the only one, but was a picture of a submarine periscope. It was unclassified, which surprised me, but the crosshairs of the submarine periscope on a submarine somewhere in the northern stretches of the ocean somewhere. And I actually think it was a British submarine, but the periscope reticles, they look the same. Hard to tell. I've been on British subs before. And I mentioned to the crowd, you know, here's a submarine picture of a Victor III class submarine. And being pretty confident that I knew more about submarines than anybody else in the audience, I was pretty confident that was a Victor III. It turns out Zach Tudor, who was on the panel yesterday with me, he actually knew more about submarines than I did. He did the real work, and he corrected me. He did it politely because he didn't do it in front of the audience to embarrass me, which would have been fine with me. I don't have any pride in that respect. If somebody knows more than you do, you ought to be embarrassed. You know, so I hope if I say anything today, somebody will correct me and, you know, don't feel like you're going to embarrass me. And Zach said, hey, Tommy, you know, that's an Alpha submarine. That's not a Victor III. And he was in a position as a data specialist in the Navy, where one of his responsibilities was training the officers on the observing through the periscope what the classification of who is out there and what are you looking at. And so his expertise was much more than mine. And it's the same thing in cyber. You know, you think you know something, there is always somebody out there that knows more than you do. And so be humble and just try to learn. And if I go to bed every night thinking, what have I learned today? And if I can think of one thing that I learned that I didn't know the day before, it's been a good day. You know, you should continuous learning. And that's what academia is all about. And Purdue does a really good job of it. Congratulations on your number 4 ranking. I see you're tied with Carnegie Mellon. So I think next year you might jump. Head in security. Okay, that's great. All right. And I'm thrilled, although I think I've got to run to the airport before he speaks, that Richard Clark is coming today. I have met him. I've talked with him. You know, he is a national treasure. And Joe, I don't know how you got him to agree to come, but you know, it's worth coming to a conference like this just to hear him talk. And so I encourage you to stick around, you know, and listen to what he has to say. He has insights far beyond what I'll present, and a lot of experience, you know, in the decision making at top levels of government. And I think he'll be fascinating. So the talk wasn't titled. I don't think it was titled at Symantec either. So that gives me the freedom and the reign to talk about anything. So I'm going to talk about basketball. Now, I know basketball may be a sore subject here with the Final Four going on, but you know, honest to goodness, you know, being in the Elite Eight or being at that top level like Purdue was this year, that is a great accomplishment. Not many teams get that far. Well, only about 8 of them, I guess. So you know, the fact you didn't get to the Final Four, I was kind of pulling for you, hoping that, you know, this would be kind of a celebration week and all, but it's really a great honor to have sporting events like that. And cyber's much like a sporting event. And I'll see if I can explain why. I couldn't play basketball to save my life. I love the game. I love to play the game, but I can't shoot. I've got really bad eyesight. And if you can't see the basket, it's really hard to hit a basket. I can't jump. I've got about a 2-inch vertical leap. You know, I think I'm Michael Jordan out there, but you know, I just can't rise. The only thing I do well in basketball is set a pick. You know, once my feet are planted, I'm not moving. It doesn't matter who runs into me. You know, I'm staying in place. And so it's a sport of specialization. Some people pass well, some people shoot well. Some people are just tall and rebound well, but there are people like me who can set a pick. And we had a basketball team, a bunch of civilians out of the government back when I was still active duty, would play basketball and would, a bunch of 40-year-old men at the time. And we would, we'd get out on the weekends and we'd play a bunch of young 20-year-olds. And you'd find that the 20-year-olds were really fast and they're really good and speed matters. And they'd run up the court and score 2 points and we would walk down the court. I would set a pick, and we had a guy, he was Assistant Secretary of the Navy for IC, for the communications and IT. And And he would come back and he could hit 9 out of 10 3-point shots any day of the week. And he would come behind my pick, shoot a 3 and score 9 out of 10 times. And we'd have to try to catch up with the young kids, get back there. They'd score 2 points. And after the half, the kids would realize they're down by 10 points to these bunch of old men. Well, slow, methodical. You know what you're doing and you do it well, and you can beat an enemy or a competitor that has talents that are much better than you, but you got to be smart about it. And very similar to cyber defense. You got to be smart about it. There are competitors out there. There's advanced persistent threats that are going to come after you, and they may be faster, and they may have good talent, but there's a way to beat them. And just like when you're an old man trying to play basketball, it's you've got to figure out, what do you have that works? One of the big issues in cyber today is complexity. We have one program on top of another program on top of another program. You just keep spending money till you run out of money, and you've got 60 different things on your network, all trying to do something similar. How do you weed out complexity to make the simplicity of operations where you can actually manage it and control it? That's a very difficult subject. But you've got to know where your talents are, what you can do, and where you can go. Ransomware is a big problem. And we've been fighting that one, for several years now, that people became alert. Wait a minute, this can happen to me. I want some of that protection. HP's made a big investment in micro virtualization. And if you're into the NIST 800 series, you can find a good description or a good definition in 800-213 to talk about micro virtualization. And so what we've done is we ended up buying a company out of Cambridge, England, professor at the University of Cambridge, Ian Pratt, who I look at Ian and say, he's one that knows a lot more than I do in this field, and I would call him an expert because he knows more than me. But even Ian didn't know it all. But he created a company that we bought that throws up anytime you click a link, anytime you go in a Word document or Excel document, if there's malware embedded, it's going to capture it in a micro virtual machine. So it protects the hardware, protects the endpoint. And there's protections for endpoints, there's protection for networks, there's protection for cloud. There's a whole bunch of fields that you have to worry about to make sure the system has protection. But Ian's product is just, it's the perfect recipe. I think he told me last week in the test that we have on machines out there on the internet, there's been 8 billion attempts to penetrate through his micro virtualization routines, 0 successes. And you go, wow, that's great. That's foolproof, but it's not. Somebody's going to figure out a way around it. Somebody's going to figure out how to beat it. It's a time domain that you've got to beat. Don't get satisfied that you're doing well and start patting yourself on the back. You made it to number 4 this year. You want to get to number 1, but if you just sit there and pat yourself on the back, you're going to be number 10. And so you've got to keep working at it and keep investing. We invest about several $1 billion a year in research at HP. And of course, we're a $60 billion company, so that's about a 5% investment in research. That's probably about average, if not below average, for Silicon Valley. A lot of the new startups are, a lot more than 5% because they've had to get off the ground and get going. At least we've been stable and around for 84 years. So we've gotten at least our feet on the ground and know where we're going. And if you're not investing, if you're not putting money into the next generation, you're not going to be around for long. You certainly aren't going to make it 84 years. You may have short-term gains, but you've got to invest for the long haul. About half of our investment is in cybersecurity. So we have labs all over the world where we've gotten experts that collaborate kind of on a 24/7 basis. We work very closely with NIST. Why? Because that's where some of the smartest people are, if not in government, in industry and academia are working there. And I'm glad to hear you're very close and aligned with what they're doing in this. So it's very, so as I said, basketball, a great analogy for the cyber risk. Now, I love watching baseball. I can't play baseball any better than play basketball, and it gets better. It's all about being able to see the ball. If you don't see the ball, you can't hit the ball. If you got a fly ball, and I've got a really bad astigmatism, and it really cuts down on three-dimensional vision. So I'm kind of seeing like you'd see on a flat screen or two-dimensional TV. And in sports, that's not good, because if you don't, if you see the ball was hit, I can see the ball, I can hear the ball being hit, but where it's going, I have no clue. And so you've got to kind of stand there and look at the trajectory and then estimate and go. I was a terrible baseball player, but it's just like in cyber, you've got to see attacks and see them coming. You've got to anticipate. You've got to predict where the next one's coming, analyze. So I've got a background in data science, but back when I studied it, you didn't call it data science. It was in my economics degree, I studied econometrics. Not that I really wanted to, but the only thing that fit in my schedule, because I was still working at the Pentagon 40 to 60 hours a week and trying to go to school at nights. And the only classes I could take that fit were econometrics. And econometrics is taking massive amount of big data sets and trying to make sense out of them and then make predictions on where the economies are going. And today, people don't call themselves econometricians. They realize they'll make 100,000 more a year if they call themselves a data scientist. So you don't find many econometricians out there anymore. You find a lot of data scientists. And that's what I was trained at, the math, the science. I used a lot more math in my economics degree than I ever did in my engineering degree, because the math and the statistics and the game theory, very, very interesting work, but very, very applicable to cybersecurity. I would almost say that, if you want to hire somebody with a new approach to cybersecurity, hire an economist who understands game theory, because in the time domain in the cyber war that we're in, game theory really applies. Wouldn't be a bad course for your students to take. Microeconomics, not when I was in school, but in today, most of micro courses, about half the course is about game theory. It's about how people make decisions. And a very interesting study, a very interesting field, and it applies to cybersecurity. So just a consideration. The one thing I could play in sports was football. I was recruited by a young coach. Well, I take that back. He was an old coach when I was there. I was young, to Navy. My draft number in Vietnam War, end of the war, was very high. It was number 3. And so they select your draft by your birth date. And my birth date was number 3 on the list. So I just figured, hey, I'm headed to the rice paddies. You kind of resign your fate to a lottery, picks out your birth date. And I was sure, so I, got the call. I went to get my physical. Army needed a few good men. No, I guess that was the Marines that need a few good men. I don't know what the Army needed, but I got the call from the Army. And I showed up at the physical, and I failed the physical, 4F. And I'm thinking, was that good news or is that bad news? It means I'm not going to go in the Army. But what am I going to do? And I'd applied for the Naval Academy, but with a failed physical, I couldn't get in the Naval Academy. They couldn't make me an officer. And so I signed a scholarship at the University of Tennessee to play football. And I don't think they knew I couldn't see, but I didn't know I couldn't see either. You just, as a young kid, you just get out on the field and play. And in April, my senior year, Coach Steve Belichick, who's a father of coach, probably not well liked in this area, but Steve called up and said, hey, we think you can play at Navy. I said, Coach, I'd love to, but I can't get in. He says, what do you mean? I said, well, Coach, my eyesight's really bad. He says, son, I can fix that. He calls back an hour later. He said, you got a waiver for your eyes and you got an appointment to the Naval Academy. Do you want to come? And so it was it was really an honor. I probably shouldn't have gone to the academy if it had not been for Coach Belichick. So I've been a big Patriots fan for years. Bill was one of my coaches there. He wasn't a paid coach. He was just the only son of the most experienced coach in Navy. And he knew more than any other coaches on the team. And so I just get yelled at by Steve, Gardner, you can't catch the ball. You got bricks for hands. What are you doing out there? But Bill would write, 5 pages of every play I screwed up and what I was doing wrong and how to correct it. Kind of like cyber, you got to know what you're doing wrong and you got to have a plan for how to correct it, or you're going to keep repeating the same mistakes. And I was pretty good at repeating the same mistakes. I wasn't the greatest football player, but the reason I was on the field is I could run. I had speed. I had agility. Back in those days, which were the 70s, I could run a 4.5 40-yard dash. Well, that's not so great today. There's guys at 4.3 and 4.4 out there, but I was the fastest guy on the Navy team. And they should have been playing safety, but since I couldn't see where the football was going, they ended up putting me in middle linebacker, much more appropriate. But the speed of action, the speed of reaction to the game was the difference between high school, where if you had some basic talent, size, strength, you were able to play, versus college, everybody had size and strength, but they were fast, and versus the pros. The pros, everybody's fast. And, the differentiation is very, very small between the great ones and the pros and the ones that are just on the team. My little brother was 6'8", 320-pound tackle, but he could run a 4.8 40. And so he was a 4-year starter at Georgia Tech, which is significantly below Purdue on the engineering list, but it's still a pretty good engineering school. And he had a 4.0 average in electrical engineering. So he wasn't a dummy. And in the pros, you got to be fast, you got to be strong, you got to be quick, but you got to be smart. Tom Brady didn't get to where he is in Tampa Bay now being a dumb athlete. He understood the defenses are being thrown at it. He understood the complexity, and it was able to do the analytics to call the right play and then execute, an ability to execute. So kind of summary, baseball, basketball, football, cyber is a sport, and you should think of it as that way. It is a competition, and there are adversaries out there that are trying to beat you every day. And you've got to be methodical, you've got to be quick, you've got to have speed of reaction, and you've got to be able to see it coming, see that ball, see that attack as it's coming. And that's really where we got into XDR about yesterday. So think about cyber as a competition, and think of it, and it for the student, it becomes a lot more fun. In the cyber courses that I teach, the challenges that I give really have to do with competition. And if you can, get those competitive juices going and think of it in that matter, you're going to be much better off. All right. So let me talk about a number of things, and I think we've got a few minutes, and I'll open up for questions. I've got a number of subjects that I can talk on. Some more interesting than others, but they all revolve around cyber. We talked a little about zero trust and zero trust principles and the 800-207 publication. The term zero trust came out of a Forrester paper, and I forget the guy's name. I've never met him, but he's still around. And the Forrester paper of 2009, where they first used the term, but zero trust principles have been going on much before that, probably principally in the Trusted Computing Group, TCG, which was trying to go and enforce a basis of trust for operation. Is one of the tenets of cybersecurity. And our first zero trust product came out in 2004, so 5 years before the term was even used or coined. We were using a trusted compute module as a basis of trust to inform what was under the operating system, the BIOS or EFI, how that was going to operate and how we could trust the operation. We've improved that every year, and that's part of that investment, the billions of dollars a year we're trying to spend to improve. But that's gotten a little bit better every year. The products we have, our marketing people, and I wanted to point out in the very back of the room, Ted Nelson. Ted is one of our marketing experts, and I think he's the one that CERIAS should be talking to about a stronger relationship between HP and this institution. So I'm going to publicly recommend it to you, Ted. They're doing well here. But the marketing people call it the Sure family of products that we have. The Sure Click, which is what I explained about the micro virtualization, the Sure Run, the Sure Recovery, and those more have to do with a cryptographic chip that stores our BIOS that we write. It's not a commercial BIOS. We write our own BIOS. We hold the code of that BIOS closer than Coca-Cola holds their secret formula. It is well protected. I don't know what it is. I can make some educated guesses, but it is. I don't have the need to know. It's well protected, but it's encrypted on a cryptographic chip, and then within 2 seconds, randomly, but no more than 2 seconds, the cryptographic chip hash of what should be in the BIOS is validated against what's in memory that is operating the system in the BIOS. And if it's not correct, the memory is flushed and the BIOS is reinserted from the trusted computer module of the chip. And so that if somebody's going to get in and hit you, they got to change things and do it within 2 seconds, which is possible. But we've yet to be able. The Marine Corps wanted us to test this. We couldn't really devise a test of how to break into it without breaking the system to start with. So what's the test when you shut it down? What are you really testing? And they got a little frustrated, but it works. And zero trust is really basis of that. At the end of the day, it's all about the money. How much are you willing to invest? If the investment is not at the level you want, then you have to argue to the CEO or to the chief financial officer why you need more funding. And I think at HP, it's been very easy, because if we don't produce the world's most secure printers, computers, workstations, and even 3D print, we're not going to be in business. We won't make it another 84 years. We'll be out of business. So when we say we need more money to invest in, and you make your case, the check's there, which is really easy. 3D print, a lot of our competitors, we see at trade shows. And I ask, how do you protect the files? What's your cybersecurity protections on your machines? We treat them just like a printer or a workstation. It's the same architecture for our 3D printers. The trusted compute, the zero trust principles go into our 3D print. And why? Because, well, it becomes a way of life. It becomes a principle of design. The first principle is, Ford, it was quality is job one. At HP, it's security is job one. We've got to make secure products. And a lot of competitors say, oh, we don't have to worry about cybersecurity. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Why? Well, we're not connected to the internet. Well, that's interesting. And how do you get your files from the design to the machine? Simple. We use a USB thumb drive. Well, that's secure. Well, the Iranians didn't think so. They figured that one out. And there's ways you could test the thumb drive and validate that it is secure and use. I mean, it's not that it's impossible, but in the future, that data on that machine is going to be used as a pedigree or for the part. It's going to be part of what you need to show the supply chain that this is the bill of material for a hardware bill of material that started with the pedigree for the file that was hashed and validated before it went on the machine and validated before you started producing the part. And it becomes a trusted file and a trust that if we use this file, we know what it produces. It's going to produce the same thing every time. So we know what the quality is. And if this part goes into an airplane or maybe a submarine, we can pretty much validate that it's not going to fail within certain parameters and that you can use it a certain amount of times, or it needs to be maintained certain periodicity, and the people will be safe. The difference between IT, which we deal with in HP, and OT, or operational technologies, is that in IT, you can lose data, you can lose intellectual property, you can shut down operations of communication. But in OT, industrial control systems, people can get hurt. I mean, seriously hurt. And things can go boom and explode, or components can shut down. If some of these things, my favorite scenario is the refineries. I think we have 163 refineries in the US. A lot of them use common design and common parts. But if you could hack into refineries and let's say some black swan event where you're able to hack into 163 all at once and break a major component within the refinery, you'd shut down the highways of America. We can't ship enough refined petroleum over here to keep the automobiles and trucks running. And here in the Midwest, you probably see enough trucks on the highway. You know, that is the blood of the American economy, is those trucking companies that are getting goods from one side of the country to the other and stopping everywhere in between. So could you devise a program that does that? I don't think it'd take too much imagination. The execution is what you worry. And what is the protection that refineries have against a cyber attack? Now, the banks are pretty good. If you want to learn about cyber, you go talk to the banks. Why? There's an incentive there, an economic incentive to protect those finances. In refineries, it's kind of like, well, they're not interested in us. Nobody's going to hurt us. We don't need to spend that much. The attitude, the culture isn't there for cyber protections, as best I know. And some of you that work in the oil and gas field probably have a closer feel for it than I do. But, I've had this discussion with CISA. It's in one of their 16 risk areas for critical infrastructure. And so they're thinking about it, but it gets back to priorities. As I said yesterday, it's unfortunate you can only spend each dollar once. And I had a boss at the Office of Naval Research. Anybody that would come in to see him, the admiral would say, "I'll fund that." And I'd have to go in after and say, well, what the admiral really meant is he would fund it if he had the money. We don't have the money. You can only spend it once. The admiral didn't understand that. He wanted to do everything. If it was a good idea, he wanted to put money on it. But you have to weigh those. And that's really what the risk management framework's about that NIST has proposed. To me, that's common sense, that we should have been doing that all along, and probably most companies have been. But it's still, you can only spend so much and dedicated so much to expenditures. That's just the way it goes. All right. I told you about micro virtualization. The thing we're working on now is tamper proofing. And capabilities of, mentioned yesterday, taking your different components and making sure that they sum up in a hash that if anybody's added, subtracted, or changed, you're going to get a message and the machine won't boot. Other ways to know if they open up the box, if you have light sensors in there, detect photons, it's going to kick you out and go, hey, wait a minute, somebody's been inside here. Was this anticipated? Did you plan that? Now, most of the machines, you don't have to open the box, particularly laptops. It's just not required. So that's some interesting work. We're trying to work on reducing the complexity. Our supply chain is recognized At least for the last 5 years, we've been in the top 20. I think 2 years ago, we were number 7 in the world. This year, I think we're number 12. So it's not as good as Purdue. It's a US News and World Report. But this is of all companies in all markets globally, not just the US. So we're very proud of that. We're very proud of the supply chain. We have 10,000 plus vendors that we deal with. And the way you become good in the supply chain, you have to know your vendors. You have to do due diligence. You have to go visit their sites, and not just the people that you deal with, but the people that they deal with. And so it multiplies quite rapidly with 10,000 people supplying us. And then we look at alternatives, because if a pandemic comes and one vendor goes under, or they don't have the people that they used to have because they're all homesick, where do you go? Our engineering, or not engineering leadership team, our executive leadership team, the ELT, last year they spent about half of their time working supply chain issues. Now, 5 years ago, I don't know how much they spent on the supply chain, but it certainly wasn't half, maybe 10%, maybe, I don't know. But you know, it became a focus because it had to be. It was a business necessity. And in the supply chain, the issues of the digital supply chain, because today, every part of the supply chain has digital components. And how do you put together a digital supply chain? Well, this is a textbook I use in my class on the digital supply chain. It's a German, Goetz Wehrberg, wrote it. He was an SAP executive. I don't think he is anymore. I think he's teaching now, but very insightful way of how you take an ERP system and use that to make decisions in your supply chain. Well, that's kind of what an ERP resource management program is supposed to do, but very insightful, the do's and the don'ts and the common eras and the culture you need. And he talks about the insect community of ants and bees. And he makes analogy between how an ant community, they all specialize, but they all communicate, and everybody knows the function they're providing, similar to the bee community, and how that applies to securing a digital supply chain. Anyway, I encourage you to read the book. I won't, give you the whole story here. I'll let you wonder on your own. You can probably figure it out. It's not that revolutionary. It's just very interesting, the biological connections to cybersecurity. We are working on those right now. There are a lot of analogies, but there's also some connections you can make. I've got a whole bunch of things I could cover, but the one I want to leave you with is something that I'm working really hard on in the quantum field. And it's not building the next quantum computer. You think HP would be involved with that. We're not. I think we're still a few years from that, but that has a big problem with the intelligence community. If you can build a quantum computer, theoretically, would be able to hack a SHA-256 algorithm that's protecting a lot of data, not in 100 years of brute force hacking that was originally designed by NIST to do, but do it within 4 hours. And depending on the computer, maybe 4 minutes. And so anything you've encrypted and think my data at rest is protected because I've encrypted it with a SHA-256, all of a sudden is vulnerable, maybe as soon as you print it out. So the quantum compute is a risk, and it's something we need to know and understand. NIST is working real hard on quantum resistant algorithms that could help. And they looked at, I think, 70 alternatives, necked it down to 25. They will probably select 3 or 4. So in case they weren't right on the first one, they've got backups they can go to. And that has happened before. I think elliptical curve is one of those methods that it's hackable and it's you can penetrate. One of the intelligence experts I know was whining about the Chinese are so stupid. They're downloading all this encrypted data. What in the world? Don't they understand this is encrypted stuff? It's no good to them? Well, maybe it's no good today, Or maybe they're storing it so when they get a quantum computer, they can go read everything we did like a history book and all secrets are now open. Or maybe, just maybe they have a quantum computer and didn't tell anybody about it. Now, if our intelligence community had a quantum computer that could unlock any encryption, do you think they're going to tell us about it? I don't think the general public would know. I think it would be a closely guarded secret in the intelligence community. I don't have any thoughts that they actually have that. I don't know about the Chinese, but if they're downloading things that are valuable right away, I'd be concerned. So the field of quantum is something to be concerned with, but our interest is in quantum information science. And so where's that going and what does that involve? There's quantum key distribution, a company that I have known for years, came out of Tennessee at Oak Ridge. They're now in Carlsbad, California, and they have a device that can make a single photon, and you can use a single photon as a digit, as 0 or 1, depending on the polarity. Is it horizontal or vertically oriented? Most people have sunglasses and they understand polarization. And so the sunglasses are either horizontal or vertically polarized, so you don't get but half the light through. You can use that as a key distribution. They're actually making money selling this to utilities as protecting SCADA devices. But the quantum true random number generator, there's a company getting ready to come out with one of those, has a real implication on security because today's encryption uses pseudo-random number generators, and pseudo-random number generators potentially hackable. So you use a true random number generator, and there's some techniques you can go through to say this is how they do it. It's being proven right now at a laboratory, at a university. They're very sensitive about where and who and where, but I'm sure if you follow the research, you can find it. That's problematic. And then quantum memory is out there. The quantum internet is the one that I'm most excited about. There's some work at University of Chicago, DOE funded, that is going on that's going to be very, very interesting work. And there is a city in this country that wants to be a leader in the quantum internet. Now, is it going to take off? It's going to go. I don't know. It's like in research. My principal job at the Office of Naval Research was to take promising work and research and get it out of the lab and put it to the Navy. Researchers don't like to do that. They like to work with their project as long as possible. So I'd encourage you to keep track of the quantum field. And I could give hour lectures on it, but I think it's probably more to learn on your own. I will recommend Philip Ball's book, professor out of Oxford, Weird Science. And he takes, without a single equation, can I explain the concepts? So I know you'd rather have equations, so would I, but the concepts are easy to understand. You don't need a PhD in physics. So I'll stop here and open the floor for questions, discussions. I should be here the rest of the afternoon if you want to chat on any specific topic I cover or anything that I haven't covered. So.
We can take a limited number of questions here if anybody has any. Otherwise, we will.
I can tell sea stories for a while.
Based on the part of the theme, or at least the beginning of his talk, we can go to halftime. But Joel will.
Perfect. Tommy, thank you very much. The panel that is going to be following you is on software security and software bill of materials.
Right.
I know that you specifically have chaired some committee in this area.
Yeah.
Do you have some comments to maybe set the stage for our next panel, since this is your area?
Thunder. I actually I didn't want to tip their hand at the next panel, but I'm focused on the hardware bill of material in my working group at CISA's Supply Chain Risk Management Task Force. And there is Sherry Caddy, who you met at the Symantec conference, DOE leader for CESAR, which is their cybersecurity effort at DOE. She leads the software bill of material work and does a really good job of it. And so we're trying to coordinate to make sure that the software is a much harder problem. In hardware, we're trying to figure out, where it was designed, where it was made, how it was tested, and it gets into a labeling criteria. And there's efforts in the federal government now to require labeling of electronic products that would give you an information. Singapore is doing it now. The Singapore method has 5 different levels of cyber protection, and it gives the consumer an idea without understanding anything about cyber that if there are 2 products, both at the same price, one has a level 1 and one has a level 5, would I pay the same amount to get better cyber protection? Well, from a decision theory point of view or a game theory point of view, that's an easy choice. If it's the same price, you pay more. But if it's a different price, how much more are you willing to pay? Well, that's the decision for the consumer, for the industry. And so you kind of do those trade-offs, and not that it's perfect and not that each product is evaluated fairly or the same, but in theory, it gives you a relative feel for how your product stacks up against competitors from a cybersecurity standpoint. Now, what are the metrics of cyber? Well, it depends. What if you define a cybersecurity space? There's another 3 lectures on definitions of cyber. Once you defined it, once you said, this is what we're going to do, the process, and this is how we're going to evaluate it, and these are the evaluation points for your product, you can come up with some answers, crude they may be, but it gives you a relative feeling. And I think we're going to go to labeling, but it's going to be on the basis of what your hardware and software bill of materials say. And software, oh gee, you want to know where the software came from? Well, who wrote it? How many pieces of code now are just robo-created? They're generated by an algorithm. This is what I want to do. Well, in Java, you do it this way, Python here, or you do this, but the person writing the code was the one who wrote here's what you do for this function. And they're writing function blocks, then our code's appropriated into. But you go back to any of these codes, Java or even C++, they all go back to machine language. Who wrote the machine language curve that went into Python? Well, you could probably trace some of that out. But if you want to know where it was written and who had the access or the creativity, a lot of that is lost in space. And people got the higher order languages because it was time consuming and costly to code in machine language. So anyway, thanks for the question, Joel.
All right, we're going to resume on the hour, but first let's thank our speaker.
Glad to be here.
He touched on a number of important topics, and I note that he said he'll be here for a while. So if you want to follow up on some of those, you can do so perhaps over coffee or tea in the back. Purdue has a significant group working in quantum, by the way. And our next panel, in fact, is kind of quantum. They may or may not be up there on the dais. You can't tell until you try to observe them. But we're not going to collapse the state until 1 or 2 minutes past the hour. So enjoy your break, and we'll see you then.